The classroom was silent, except for the sound of chalk scraping against the board. Mr. Reynolds, a strict and condescending math teacher, turned around, his smirk widening as he eyed Maya, the quiet black girl sitting at the back. "Since you seem so uninterested in class, why don't you come up here and solve this?" He stepped aside, revealing a complex equation that even the brightest students struggled with. Maya hesitated. She wasn't uninterested. She was just used to being ignored. Her hands clenched into fists under the desk, her stomach twisting in knots. The entire class turned to look at her, some snickering, others whispering. "Come on, don't be shy," Mr. Reynolds taunted. "Or are numbers too difficult for you?" His voice dripped with mockery, and a few students laughed. Maya's heart pounded. She knew what this was. He didn't expect her to solve it. He wanted her to fail, to prove his point. She took a deep breath and stood up. With slow, deliberate steps, she walked to the board, her mind racing. The equation was intimidating, filled with exponents, variables, and fractions. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Mr. Reynolds crossed his arms. "Go ahead, we don't have all day." Maya picked up the chalk, her fingers tightening around it. The truth was, she had always loved math. Numbers made sense to her in a way that people didn't, but she had never been given the chance to prove it. The moment the chalk touched the board, the room grew still. She didn't hesitate. One step at a time, she broke the equation down, her movements confident, precise. The snickers faded. The whispers stopped. Mr. Reynolds's smirk twitched. By the time she reached the final answer, the room was silent. She placed the chalk down, turned around, and met her teacher's stunned expression. The class stared at her, eyes wide, jaws slightly open. Maya lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Was that all?" Mr. Reynolds blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He had set her up to fail, but instead, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The silence in the room stretched uncomfortably. Mr. Reynolds's face, which had been smug just moments ago, was now frozen in disbelief. He stepped closer to the board, eyes scanning Maya's work, searching for a mistake. There had to be one. A girl like her, quiet, overlooked, the kind he never expected much from, couldn't possibly have solved something this advanced. But the numbers didn't lie. A nervous chuckle escaped his lips. "Well, lucky guess," he muttered, grabbing an eraser. "Let's try another one." Maya crossed her arms. "There's no luck in math, sir. It's either right or wrong. And that," she nodded toward the board, "is right." The class erupted. Some students gasped, others laughed, but all of them were locked onto Maya in a way they never had before. One of the boys in the front row, Jason, leaned forward. "Wait, hold up. That was actually right?" Before Mr. Reynolds could respond, another voice cut through the tension. That was more than right. The voice didn't belong to a student. At the doorway, a tall man in a sharp gray suit stood with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on Maya. Mr. Reynolds stiffened. Professor Carter," he stammered. I didn't realize you'd arrived." Maya frowned. "Who?" Professor Carter stepped into the room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "I came to discuss the upcoming academic competition," he said. "But now, I'm far more interested in this." He gestured to the board. "Tell me, young lady, do you often solve equations like these?" Maya's fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater. I just like numbers," she admitted. The professor studied her for a moment, then turned to Mr. Reynolds. "And you thought she couldn't do it?" Mr. Reynolds looked cornered. She's never spoken up in class. I had no idea. That's because you never asked. Professor Carter cut him off. Then he turned back to Maya. How would you like to take a real test? One that might change your life? Maya's breath hitched. The entire class held theirs. Mr. Reynolds's face paled. He had wanted to embarrass her. Instead, he had just put her on a path she never saw coming. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. A real test? What did that even mean? She looked at Professor Carter, then at Mr. Reynolds, whose face had turned an odd shade of red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Moments ago, he had been in control, mocking her in front of everyone. Now, he was the one standing there, exposed. What kind of test? Maya finally asked, her voice steady. Professor Carter smiled slightly, as if he liked that she wasn't immediately intimidated. One that isn't about proving your worth to a single teacher, he said, but to the world. The room buzzed with whispers. Jason leaned over his desk, eyes wide. Yo, what is happening right now? Professor Carter ignored the murmurs. I'm a recruiter for the National Mathematics Scholars Program, he explained. We search for untapped genius, students who have the potential to change the world, but haven't been given the right opportunity. He gestured toward the board. This equation wasn't meant for high school students. It was an advanced university-level problem, and you solved it in minutes. Maya swallowed hard. She knew she was good at math, but she never thought of herself as special. Numbers had always felt like a safe space, a world where she could disappear. But now, everyone was looking at her differently. She glanced at Mr. Reynolds again. He was staring at Professor Carter like he wished he could make him disappear. With all due respect, Professor, he said through gritted teeth, I don't think she's ready for something like this. She's exactly the kind of student we're looking for, Professor Carter interrupted. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. And whether or not you saw her potential is irrelevant. Maya's fingers curled into fists. She wasn't sure if it was excitement, fear, or something else entirely racing through her veins. Professor Carter pulled a card from his pocket and placed it on her desk. This is my contact information. I want you to take a placement exam next week. If you pass, you'll be eligible for a scholarship to one of the top universities in the country. The class erupted again. A scholarship? To a top university? Maya felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath her. She reached out, hesitating before picking up the card. It was smooth and expensive looking, the kind of thing that didn't belong in her hands. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. Maya, I'm sure you'll need time to think. No, she said, her voice suddenly stronger than she expected. I'll do it. Professor Carter grinned. Good choice. Mr. Reynolds looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Maya tightened her grip on the card. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. The bell rang, but no one moved. The entire class was still buzzing, whispering, exchanging glances between Maya, Professor Carter, and Mr. Reynolds. It was like witnessing a power shift in real time, one that no one had expected. Maya stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye on her. For years, she had kept her head down, avoiding attention, surviving through silence. Now, she was at the center of something bigger than herself. As she gathered her books, Mr. Reynolds stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Maya, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I hope you understand. This is a big decision. You wouldn't want to get your hopes up over something unrealistic." She met his gaze, her hands tightening around her notebook. The same man who had laughed at her just moments ago was now trying to convince her to doubt herself. Professor Carter stepped forward. "The only thing unrealistic here is an educator underestimating his own student," he said, his tone sharp. Mr. Reynolds's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He simply turned and stormed out of the room. Maya exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. Professor Carter gave her an encouraging nod. "Be ready next week. It won't be easy, but something tells me you're used to challenges." Maya nodded. "I am." As she stepped out of the classroom, students flooded around her. Jason was the first to reach her. "Yo, Maya, that was insane," he said. "You really showed him." Another student chimed in. "I had no idea you were this smart." "Neither did I," she admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, people weren't just looking at her. They were seeing her. But as she walked through the hallway, the excitement started mixing with something else. Doubt. Was she really ready for this? A scholarship? A future at one of the top universities? It sounded like something out of a dream, not her reality. Then she remembered the way Mr. Reynolds had looked at her, like she wasn't supposed to be anything more than what he had decided. And just like that, the doubt burned away. This wasn't just about an exam anymore. It was about proving something. To herself, to everyone. She glanced down at the business card in her hand. 1 week. She had 1 week to change everything. The week passed in a blur. Maya barely slept. Every night, she sat at the small wooden table in her room, solving equations until the numbers blurred in front of her eyes. It wasn't just about impressing Professor Carter or proving Mr. Reynolds wrong anymore. It was about rewriting the story people had written for her before she even had a chance to pick up the pen. Her mother noticed the change. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," she said one evening, standing in the doorway. "I'm proud of you, but don't forget to breathe." Maya forced a smile. "Just one more problem, Mama." Her mother sighed but didn't argue. She understood. She had always understood. Finally, the day arrived. As Maya walked into the classroom, her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The entire school seemed to have caught wind of what was happening. The seats were packed, not just with students, but with teachers, even the principal. At the front, Mr. Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, wearing the same smug look he had that day. Beside him, Professor Carter gave her a small nod. A large whiteboard stood in the center, a single complex equation written across it. "This equation has stumped mathematicians for years," Mr. Reynolds announced, his voice carrying through the room. "Even graduate students struggle with it, but Maya here believes she's capable." His lips curled into a smirk. "Let's see if she is." A hush fell over the room. Maya stepped forward, took the marker, and faced the equation. Her fingers trembled for only a second before she drowned out the noise, the stares, even Mr. Reynolds' presence. She focused. Numbers made sense to her in a way the world never had. Where people saw confusion, she saw patterns. Where they saw impossibility, she saw pathways. The first stroke of the marker was slow, deliberate, then the second, then another. Whispers filled the room. She wasn't just writing. She was moving through the problem like she had walked through it 1,000 times before. Step by step, the equation unfolded, the impossible slowly becoming possible. Mr. Reynolds's smirk began to falter. Professor Carter leaned forward, his eyes wide with realization. And then, Maya put the marker down. Silence. The answer sat there, clear and undeniable. Someone gasped. Then chaos erupted. Students shot to their feet. Phones were pulled out. People whispered, shouted, pointed. Professor Carter was the first to speak. "That's—" He ran a hand through his hair, almost in disbelief. "That's correct." Maya turned to Mr. Reynolds. His face had gone pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that moment, she knew he wasn't mocking her anymore. For a moment, the entire room felt frozen in time. The only sound was the faint squeak of the marker as it rolled across the whiteboard tray. Maya turned to face the crowd, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had done it. The impossible. Then, as if someone had pressed play on a paused scene, the room erupted into chaos. Students whispered, some gasped, and others fumbled with their phones, capturing the moment. The news spread like wildfire. Maya, the girl who had been mocked, had just solved an equation that had stumped even the brightest minds. Mr. Reynolds stood there, his face drained of all color. His usual arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by something Maya had never seen before. Fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of what came next. Professor Carter stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Maya with something entirely different. Admiration, respect. He grabbed a piece of chalk and quickly went over her solution, verifying each step. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he laughed under his breath. "Incredible," he muttered. Then, louder to the entire room, "This young lady just did something extraordinary." A wave of excitement rippled through the students. Some clapped. Others stared in disbelief. Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard. "It's just—" He tried to grasp for some excuse, but the weight of his mistake crushed any words he might have had. Maya met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "What was that you said the other day?" she asked softly. "That I didn't belong in your class?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. His ego wouldn't allow him to apologize, but the truth was written all over his face. Professor Carter placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "We need to talk after class," he said, his voice warm. "I have a few colleagues at MIT who would be very interested in meeting you." Maya blinked. "MIT?" Mr. Reynolds visibly flinched. Professor Carter smiled. "Yes, and Harvard, and Stanford. With your talent, you shouldn't be sitting in a high school classroom. You should be working with the best minds in the world." Maya's heart pounded. The same girl who had been laughed at, humiliated, and underestimated now had doors opening she had never even dared to dream of. She turned to face the class, her classmates, some of whom had laughed with Mr. Reynolds just a week ago. Now they looked at her differently. Not as a joke, not as someone who didn't belong, but as someone extraordinary. She picked up her backpack and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she paused just long enough to glance over her shoulder at Mr. Reynolds. "I guess I do belong here after all," she said. And with that, she left, leaving behind the stunned silence of a teacher who had just learned the biggest lesson of his life.